So we're starting out in Genesis 2. I know we covered a little bit of Genesis 2, but we're going to really dig into it. So rather than start with Genesis 2:3, where we left off last time, we're just going to go right back to the start. And if you're like me, every time you read it, it reads a little bit differently. It reads a little bit more deeply. It sinks in a little bit further. And that's why I continue to encourage people. Read that Bible in the year, but study that Bible in a lifetime. Do that annual Bible reading so you're constantly fed the Word. Okay, let God do the rest. You do the planting. Let Him do the watering. Let Him do the weeding. Let Him do the gardening. Let Him bring the harvest. But do not forsake the study of the Word, for that is the instruction. It doesn't say read the Word to show yourself approved. It says study the Word. So we start out in Genesis chapter 2. Vaychulu hashamayim v'charetz v'kol tsei va'am. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. This verse begins with the completion of all work on the sixth day, giving us the basic facts. The second phase refers to all the hosts, both the heavens and the earth. The structure used to deal with the seventh day is totally different than that used for the first 6 days. It breaks with that of the 6 days, emphasizing 5 basic things: the finishing, the completion, the cessation, the blessing, and the sanctification. Vaikal Elohim bayom hashvi'i malakto asher. A good word for you to know, the word asher or asher. Same word, asher, okay, means to sanctify something. Okay, to sanctify means hallowed. How many times do you say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name? Well, what does hallowed mean to you? Okay, the definition of hallowed is to be set apart. So when we say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name is set apart above all names, above all other names. So it's very clear when we say the name above all names. But just by saying the word asher, malakto asher asa, all right, we are looking at this great hallowed name of God. And on the seventh day, God ended His work which He had made, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He has made. The verse emphasizes the cessation of creation. God has now finished His creative work, and from this time on, the function is no longer creation, but procreation. As God was in the position of having already finished His work, He therefore abstained from work on this seventh day. The Hebrew word shavat means to complete, to cease, or to rest. God rested, not in the sense of being tired or needing recuperation, but in the sense of cessation, of having completed or finished His work. The word shavatis, used here as a verb, not a noun, and so it is not a proper name for the seventh day. The noun form Shabbat or Sabbath will not be used until the book of Exodus, becoming a proper name for the seventh day only in Exodus 16. So up until this time, it's not to be a day that's set apart, a day to be remembered, a day to be honored. This is not the birth of the Ten Commandments. This is the story of creation and the order in which things were done. So the noun form Shabbat would not be used until the book of Exodus, becoming a proper name for the seventh day only in Exodus 16. In this passage, the word is used as a verb, meaning its use here denotes only a concept of cessation and rest. For now, it's only called the seventh day, not the Sabbath day. Notice also that no command here is given to observe this day. On this day, God simply ceased His creative work. He stopped. He was done. He was finished. It establishes a marker for us to understand the simplest terms, that there is not this is not an old earth, this is a young earth, and it was all done. All the work was done in 6 days. Vayverech Elohim et yom hashvi'i, vakadesh oto ki vo shavat, mikol malakto asher. You hear that name again, asher, sanctified. You see bara. You remember we learned bara in the beginning was created. Elohim la'asot. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Where do we see that? Asher. Because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created. Where do we see that? Bara Elohim. Okay, what are the first three words of the Bible? Bereshit, bara, Elohim. So you see repeated again in the same form, which means it's only an attribute of God, and it's only God who creates and makes. He's the only one that can make something out of nothing. He created matter out of nothing. Man cannot do that. I'm always reminded of the story of the scientist that picks up a test tube and he proves that there's life in the test tube, and he says, "You see, Lord, I did it. I finally created life in a test tube." And God said, "Well, tell me, how did you do it?" He said, "Well, I took a little bit of carbon and I took some manganese and I took some," and God said, "Well, hold on a second. Go get your own elements. Then you'll show me what creation is. You are recreating using the elements that I created. Now you start from nothing, and then I'll be impressed. So call me then." The blessing of the seventh day begins with its sanctification. The Hebrew word for hallowed means to be set apart. It emphasized elevation and exaltation and the idea of being lifted above the level of all other days. The reason that God sanctified the seventh day is that God ceased his creative work on that day. It actually reads, because that from that day, from the day which he created, from that which he made. The phrase "the from the day which he created" uses the word bara, emphasizing something only God can do. And the second phrase, "from that which he made," uses the word as a word that can be used of both God and man. We can make things. Larry made me out of a piece of wood the most beautiful bowl that I've ever seen. Right? He took a chunk of wood and what God had created, and he took it and he made something useful. I display it as a piece of art in my home. All right? The idea of me eating salad out of it would, to me, defile this piece of art that you brought into my life as a gift. And so I look at it and I realize the workmanship and the time and how difficult it must have been for you to form out of something that was raw, had no form, and had the vision to create something that would be of such function and of such beautiful form, and then you embedded in it green stones, green stones that made it pop to life. It was something that your eyes were drawn to, and so I put it in a nook in my home where there's light shining on it and the green sparkles, and it makes you look at the intricacies and you see the years of age of that particular piece of wood. So Exodus 31:17 states, "On the seventh day God rested and was refreshed." So let's look at the first Sabbath. Genesis 2 verses 1 through 3. The word Sabbath isn't found in this paragraph, but Moses is writing about the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week. The phrase seventh day is mentioned 3 times in verses 2 to 3. Sabbath comes from a Hebrew word Shabbat that means to cease working, to rest, and is related to the Hebrew word for 7, which is Sheba. So helping you learn to count. Okay? Who knows the Hebrew word for 1? 2, 3, 7. Sheva. Okay? This is your Hebrew lesson for the day. So you've heard Asher, sanctified, Bara, create, Sheva, 7. All right? Now, if the seventh day of the week is considered to be the Sabbath, if you read the Catholic 10 Commandments, the fourth commandment on the Catholic 10 Commandments is honor the Lord's day. Honor and observe, or honor and keep the Lord's day. Okay? Because Constantine changed the Sabbath from the seventh day being Friday night at sundown to Saturday night at sundown to Sunday as the Lord's day. Okay? If you count from Monday to Sunday, it's the seventh day. If you count from Friday to Sunday, it's the ninth day. So it all depends on what system you're using. Okay? Now, did I mention the words right and wrong? No. Has anybody here ever heard me say to you, you observed the wrong seventh day? Okay? That's not, the Bible doesn't tell us that. It doesn't tell us you're doing this right or you're doing this wrong. As a matter of fact, if you're doing it right, you spend every day with the Lord. But you set aside a certain day. Some people who work shift work and who work weekends, Wednesday is their Sabbath day. That's the day they take time off and go and spend time with the Lord. They may go fishing, they may go to the lake, they may do whatever they do, but that's their seventh day. They cease from work and rest. That's what Sabbath means, a day to cease from work and rest. So, there's 52 weeks in a year, right? So you would expect there would be 52 Sabbaths, right? Wrong. Because there's a minimum of 12 other times in the Bible that the Lord says to cease from work and hold a sacred assembly. Do no regular work. So the minimum number of Sabbaths that there are in the Bible is 64. Okay? A Sabbath doesn't have to occur on a Friday, Saturday. It can occur on a Wednesday. It all depends on what part of the calendar we're in. So we need to consider 3 different Sabbaths found in the Bible. Well, that's interesting. We found 3 times in the beginning. We found it in Genesis 1:1, we found it in John 1:1, and then we found it in Mark again. I think Mark 3:11 maybe, or 11:3, I forget which one it is now, but we found 3 references to in the beginning. Now we find 3 Sabbaths. The personal Sabbath of the Lord God. The first Sabbath didn't take place because God was tired, because God doesn't get weary. God set apart the 7th day because his work of creation was finished and he was pleased and satisfied with what he created. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Let me teach you another word. The word for good I taught you last week was tov, okay, which means good. So if I say good morning, it's boker tov, boker meaning morning. If I want to say good afternoon, I'd say yom tov, Y-O-M, which means day, good day. If I want to do good evening, not good night going to sleep, good evening, but good evening, it would be erev tov. And if I want to say good night, I would say laila tov. What do they have in common? They all end in good. Okay, T-O-V means good. But in this case, when he says the word very, he adds a word to our vocabulary called me'od. So let's say we're at a restaurant. Tommy, we're sitting there and you tell the waiter that you really, really liked. You ask me to go get the captain and you want to talk to him. And you go over and say, man, that lamb was amazing. Could I get the best piece of that lamb? And he brings it to you. And he stands there when you take the first bite. And he watches. And he looks at your facial expression. And he determines whether or not. And then he asks you the question in Hebrew, how was it? And your answer is tov ma'od. Very good. Okay, it's the very good. You all know that? Okay? That means very good. Okay, that's what he's saying. And that's what God said. He said, and God saw everything that he had made, Genesis 1:31, and behold, it was very good. It wasn't just good, it was very good. So 3 things are distinctive about the 7th day of the creation week. First, there's no mention of evening and morning. Do you remember, it was evening and morning the first day, the evening and morning the second day, the evening and morning the 6th day. But it does not mention that there was evening and morning the 7th day, suggesting that God's Sabbath rest would have no end. See, remember, when God created the world, he created it out of chaos. He made it perfect, exactly how he wanted it. And therefore, he created it for his eternal resting place. The place where he would come to the garden and have fellowship with his creation, Adam and Eve, and their offspring, because he blessed them, and he would have an ongoing relationship with them, and rest would never end for him. He wouldn't have to be at the work of dealing with this and the work of dealing with that. And we wouldn't have to be with the work of dealing with other than our assigned work, but yet he would get to spend the day with us. That's how he created it. So why would he have to have evening and morning? This was the end of his work. God's work was now finished. What else was there for him to do but enjoy his creation, to celebrate it, to be with it, to participate in it, to partake of it? Unfortunately, man's sin interrupted God's rest, and God had to search for Adam and Eve and deal with them. We read that in Genesis 3, 8, and 9, John 5, 9, and 17. Second, there's no record that he blessed any of the other 6 days, but God did bless the seventh day. In blessing it, he made it a blessing. Third, after blessing the seventh day, God sanctified it, which means he set it apart for his own special purposes. He does not tell us why. We can see that it was his intention to create it perfect. There would be harmony among the animals, there'd be harmony among humanity, that they would all have the same source of food, there would be an abundance, there would be a plenty, the land would be easy to work, it would be fruitful, it would multiply, the fish would multiply, the birds would multiply, the harvest would multiply. What could possibly be the problem? But it was sin. God is the God of time as well as the Lord of eternity. It was he who created time and established the rotation of the planets and their orbits around the sun. It was he who marked out the 7-day week and set aside 1 day for himself. Every living thing that God had created lives a day at a time except humans made in God's image. People rush around in the frantic rat race of life, always planning to rest but never seeming to fulfill their plan. It's been said that most people in our world are being crucified between two thieves: the regrets of yesterday and the worries about tomorrow. That's why they can't enjoy today. I have somebody I care for very dearly, love them very much, is always asking me about the future. What are you going to be doing in the future? What are you going to be doing in the future? What are the future plans? And my answer are, I'll just give you my next breath that God gives me. Well, what about saving? I said, it doesn't say store up your treasures on earth. It says store up your treasures in heaven. Well, what about this plan? What about this plan? You're going to Nashville. What's your plan? I said, my plan is to be where God sent me. He told me to go. I have no idea who I'm going there to meet. And I won't know maybe till I meet them. I might not know a year from now. I might not know 5 years from now. I might not know 10 years from now. I always tell the story that in 1958, I was 6 years old. I was now in, first grade at the time, and you had to take gym, physical education. Okay? My teacher's name was Cyril J. Pittman. Okay? Say, oh, what a great memory. No, you'll understand why I remember his name was Cyril J. Pittman. And Mr. Pittman used to line up all the kids, and we used to have to run the length of the field, and then you have to run the length of the field back. Right? And he would run behind us, and the slow ones he would give names to. And my best friend, he would say, come on, Obadiah, run a little bit faster. Come on, Zechariah, move it, move it, move it, move it, move it. And to me, he would say, come on, Nicodemus, let's get moving. We had no idea where he was coming up with these names. We had never heard these names before. Now, I'm telling you, I'm 6 years old. Then the next year, you have Jim and Cyril J. Pittman as your teacher, and again, he calls me Nicodemus. Means nothing to me. have no reference for the name Nicodemus. It's just an odd nickname that he threw at me. And Sheldon, he called Obadiah. All right. And another friend, Bobby Zimmerman, he called him Zechariah. We all went our different ways in life, and all of a sudden I come to faith and I'm reading through the Bible. I'm flipping through the New Testament for the first time, and I'm reading. All of a sudden I read about a Jewish rabbi that goes to Jesus at night and asks him, how do I inherit the kingdom of heaven? And lo and behold, his name was Nicodemus. Do you not think that I went back to the moment at 6 years old when I heard myself being called Nicodemus? And there I am on the day of my salvation, as I had asked the Lord, how do I inherit the kingdom of heaven? I was 44 years old. 38 years later, this man spoke me into the kingdom when I was 6 years old. So why should I worry about who I'm going to meet? Because I have no idea what the plan is. I'll meet who I meet, and God will use them as He chooses to use them, and for whatever purpose He chooses to use them for. And I won't get the chance. Jan Crouch has gone on to be with the Lord because I really wanted to go right up to her, or just right up to her, and just look. That's all I ever wanted to do with Jan Crouch. That's all I ever wanted to do. Okay? I've missed that chance. She's gone on to be with the Lord. Okay? But I guarantee you, I'll get to have my opportunity. There's still some in the back of my mind that are living that I will go up to, and I will check them out just as much as they'll check me out. And there might not be any words spoken, but we will have said all we've had to say. All right? So I have no idea. Why is this Jewish kid from Pittsburgh going to the largest national religious broadcasters event where everybody from TBN and CBN and God TV and all the big names that you know will be there, and there'll be me, the Jewish kid walking around going, and who are you again? Oh, well, my name is, I don't know, T.D. Jakes. Oh, well, you and I have met before. And I go, but, you know, there'll be these names that people go, oh, you met Ravi Zacharias, or you met, what's his name? Benny Hinn. Yes, this is televised. So it says, that's why we can't enjoy it today. Relying on modern means of transportation and communication, we try to live 2 or 3 days at a time, only to run headlong against the creation cycle of the universe, and the results are painful and often disastrous. A famous Chinese scholar came to America to lecture, and during the course of his tour was met at a busy metropolitan railway station by his university host. If we run quickly, we can catch the next train and save ourselves 3 minutes, said the host. The scholar quietly asked, and what significant thing shall we do with the 3 minutes that we save by running? A good question that could not be answered. I know that I drive down 280 several times a day. Our studio is on 280. I live right off of 280. And I can describe some of the sights I've seen. Someone driving their car with their feet, painting their toenails while driving down the car, okay, with one hand, holding the phone in their other hand, toes up on the steering wheel, steering, putting on the toenail polish, arm like this, talking on the phone. What was the other hand doing? Was it on the steering wheel? No, because they were steering their feet, their knees. They were doing their eyes, going 75 miles an hour. Where were they in such a hurry to go? What were they going to do with that extra time? Now because I have such little downtime, I do run home. Like Jason will tell you that I fly out of the studio. I've had a long night of show preparation or teaching preparation. Then I've had, you sit under 50,000 watts of light. Imagine being a baked potato. All right, 50,000 watts of light gives off, I can't tell you how many thousands of degrees. Okay, but we have a special unit built in the studio just to deal with the heat from the lights. And I have to make entertaining, engaging, and intelligent conversation for 3 solid hours with people I've never met before. All right? And I'm ready to run home because then there's just 4 hours before I have to get ready to go teach somewhere else. So that couple of hours is precious to me. Now, will I run you over to get there? Only you know. Henry David Thoreau wrote in Walden over a century ago, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." I wonder what he'd say if he saw the frantic people running up and down escalators in our airline terminals. God had done so many wonderful things during the 6 days of creation, but the climax of the creation week was God's rest after his work. As we shall see, God has sanctified work as well as rest. And it's rest that seems to be the greatest need in people's hearts today. Augustine was correct when he wrote, "Thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee." Jesus said in Matthew 6, "Why do you worry? Who of you can add but a single moment to your life through worrying?" You can't make your hair grow. You can't make it turn colors. You spend all your time spending your money on lavish clothing, and look at the birds of the field and the lilies of the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. They're more adorned than Solomon with all his wealth. How many of you people have bird feeders in your yard? Okay. I do. They're all over. Got hummingbird feeders and bird feeders, and I have every kind of bird, every kind of wildlife. I have rabbits that come. I just enjoy the rich natural beauty of God's creation. How does that little 4-footed thing avoid the snakes and the coyotes and that little bunny? And I watched it when it was born. I mean, it was tiny the first time it came, and I left a little pile right by the fence, right between the 2 pickets, so that whatever was little could get to it. All right, and then one night, my little dog went crazy, and we ran out there, and a possum had gotten his head stuck between the 2 rails. So I'm trying to deal with a dog that wants to help out, all right, and trying to figure out this. You know, they have sharp teeth, okay? And when they're cornered, they don't play possum. They play Bengal tiger. So literally what I did was I took one of the bird feeders and just kind of inched it toward it and was able to get it where it was on top of it, or just the weight of it could get its head down low enough without hurting it, where he could scoot out of there and run. And you know, the thing freed himself and just sat there. And I thought to myself, what do you think? Now that I've saved your life, I'm going to feed you? Yeah. So I opened the feeder and took a handful of seed, and it sat there and ate for a little while. And I was no longer afraid because I wasn't going to harm it. I didn't bang it on the head. I just was freed it. Okay? This is what God does for us. He doesn't bang us on the head to set us free. He's gentle. But God has done so many wonderful things during the 6 days of creation, but the climax of creation week was God's rest after his work. And we shall see God has sanctified work as well as rest, but it's rest that seems to be the greatest need. What's your greatest need? Is it rest? And what will you do with it? Will you plan out what your next project is? Or you just enjoy the moment? The most freeing thing that I ever did in my life was gave everything away. Most freeing thing in my grandfather's life was when, in the mid-60s, he sold his scrapyard to U.S. Steel, and it became the first recycling center in the world. And back in the mid-60s, the price they paid him was a fortune. And he took 90% of it, and he calculated his age at 64 and said the longest he expected to live was 10 years. So he took 10% of the proceeds of what he sold to U.S. Steel for, and he set it aside to live on for 10 years. Till he was 74. Do you know what age he died at? 94. That 10% lasted him for 30 years, not for 10. Why? Because God brought the increase, because you couldn't outgive God. Do you know that I consider the meeting of you and the knowing of you and being involved in your lives and having a relationship with you as greater wealth than I had when I sat in the boardroom of Hewlett Packard? Greater wealth than when I could fly first class on any airplane on a moment's notice, pick up the phone and say, I need to have lunch in Paris tomorrow. As King Solomon said, meaningless, meaningless, it's all meaningless. Did I have the greatest wealth? Look around, you've got 70, 80 people coming together to share the Word of God in unity, to want to know the truth of the same God that I serve, the same God I love, the same hunger to hear His Word. How do you put a price on that? Billy Graham was the richest man who ever lived. His net worth was $25 million. But he never knew it. They never told him what his net worth was. He sold a lot of books, wrote a lot of books, but he never really knew what his net worth was. What he did know, what he told his children, was that he confessed that he spent 70% of his time away from his children. But it was because of who his wife was and the kind of wife God gave him that you have an Anne Graham Lotz and you have a Franklin Graham, who had the vision of their father because they had a godly mother, to explain to them what their father was doing was important. And they don't act like orphan spirits or abandoned children or ones that weren't unloved. What he did with the 30% was he poured it into his family, so much so that it lasted them the 70% that he wasn't there. You know, we all have our struggles, we all have our family dysfunctions, we all have our family stories of, you know, my father that worked day and night. But you know what, I worked day and night. And he did it for money, and I do it for the glory of God. And I don't look like I've missed a meal, I look like I should have missed a few. But God has provided that since November of 2006, when I walked away from Atlanta and came to Birmingham and shook my first person's hand of anybody that I'd ever met in Birmingham, Alabama. I had never been into this city before. And God said, this is where you shall live. This is probably where you shall die. I haven't gotten the final decision on that yet. I've gotten a lot of letters with a lot of people's plans. I've heard the desires, the votes in. A lot of people have voted one way or another. But the point is that if you would have told me growing up as a Jewish post-Holocaust generation child in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in January of 1952, that here I would be in, almost March of 2018, preaching the gospel in Hebrew to a group of people who never heard Hebrew before, loved Jesus but didn't know enough about him, knew he was the Savior but didn't know his history, and this is his story. This is what he grew up learning. This is what he grew up memorizing. This is what I grew up memorizing. Not just the words of it, but what it meant. That's why the perspective that's brought to you is a perspective based on experience, not on theory. And so it's important that you would understand that. The national Sabbath of Israel. There's no mention of the Sabbath in Scripture until Exodus 16:23, when God gave the regulations to Israel about gathering the daily manna. From the way this commandment's worded, it suggests that the Jews already knew the importance of the Sabbath and were observing it as a day of rest. In giving the Sabbath to Israel, the Lord related this special day to other events in sacred history. To begin with, when God gave Israel the law at Mount Sinai, the Sabbath was connected with creation. God was the generous giver of all that they needed, and they must acknowledge Him by worshiping the Creator and not the creation. You see, we have people who are the earth lovers, the tree huggers. They love God's creation. But we also have the people that love the God of Israel but don't love Israel. They love the Jewish Messiah, but they hate the Jews. Now, I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard, but I'm making you think about it for the first time. You love the God of Israel, but do you love Israel? You love the Jewish Messiah, but do you love the Jewish people? There are denominations of Christianity that love the Jewish Messiah and hate the Jews. You look them up. Do a keyword search on how many Christians are under replacement theology, where the doctrine is the church has replaced Israel in God's covenant. You will find that there are millions, tens of millions, who every Sunday are told that they are Israel. Israel's Israel when God says it's Israel. God was the generous giver of all that they needed, and they must acknowledge Him by worshiping the Creator and not the creation. They were not to imitate the pagan nations around them, Romans 1:18. Moses even mentioned the weekly rest needed by servants and farm animals, so keeping the Sabbath was a humanitarian act as well as a religious duty. The Lord commanded His people to observe every 7th year as a sabbatical year and every 50th year as a year of Jubilee. This would permit the land to enjoy its Sabbath and be renewed. Let me tell you a couple of things. The very cross itself is a picture of the Ten Commandments. Not that it was designed that way, but this is a life application, a teaching application tool, which I'll give you. I actually make it easy for you because I can point it out to you, because I even remembered. Yes, even I told you I went in for my annual Medicare required examination. And you know, during that examination, they test your ability to remember things, right? So they ask you to remember 3 words. And the doctor in the beginning of the examination says, I'm going to give you 3 words. And later on in the examination, I'm going to ask you to recite back to me the 3 words to see how well you retain, to see if you're pre-dementia, all those things. And I said, fine. So it came time, and he said to me, what are the 3 words? I said to him, they're the same 3 words you asked me last year. And he wrote a little note in the margin, don't ask this guy about his memory again. But they were the exact same, bag, ball, and tree, were the same words he asked me a year ago. He said, you actually remember that? And I do. He said, I've been asking those same words ever since I came out of medical school, the same 3 words. You're the first person that ever said to me, those are the same words you asked me last year. He said, I'm striking dementia, the possibility of dementia, off your list. You have a greater chance of being hit by a bus than by you losing your mind. And I said, do you drive a bus? So I was just checking. All right, so we see here the cross. All right, let's take the circle out of the picture. You see the cross. Cross is kind of interesting because 2/3 of it are below the cross line, the cross bars, the horizontal, and 1/3 of it's above. Is it by design? Well, it kind of makes sense, but could it be that there's a larger design? If I were to take a number, put numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, being the cross piece, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, down the vertical piece, 4 across the horizontal. And I took a look at the 10 Commandments, and I would say that everything above the cross has to do with my relationship with God. Those first 3 commandments are only to do with your relationship with God. They have nothing to do with your relationship with man. Is that correct? Anybody want to argue that point with me? Okay, they all have to do with your vertical relationship. Okay, then you come to this cross piece, and this cross piece happens to be wider than the rest. Why is it wider than the rest? Because it holds more weight than the rest. Okay? As a matter of fact, it was the weight of Jesus and his own weight which collapsed his lungs. Therefore, it wasn't the legs supporting the body. It was the cross piece and his arms nailed to it and his body being crushed by the weight of his own body. So this was the, well, it's not the fulcrum point, it's not, what point would you call that? It's the pressure point, I guess we'll call it. The nexus, okay? Happened to be right there. Well, isn't that interesting? Because if we don't observe a Sabbath, I'm not saying the Sabbath because I'm not promoting a 6th day or 7th day being Friday, Saturday, or a 7th day being Sunday. I purposely don't care. All right, that's between you and God. As far as I'm concerned, every day is a Sabbath. I know that when I wake up in the morning, I wake up from resting. So I know that I've spent at least 8 hours in a Sabbath of a sort. May not be a 7th day Sabbath, but it's in a period of rest. But think about this. If the first 3 are all about our relationship with God, and then we have this cross piece, this horizontal, and we put the 4th commandment across there, that secures our relationship with God and prepares us to be rested well enough where we can start dealing with mankind, which is below the cross. See, if I don't have a relationship with God, I can't have a relationship with man. And salvation, if that represents the cross piece, there's a whole lot more below the after salvation is before salvation. God can't use you until you get saved. Right? Not for the advancement of the kingdom, right? So if salvation was the end-all and be-all, we'd all die the minute we said yes to the Lord. So there must be a whole lot more to it than just saying yes to the Lord, and that being the end-all and the be-all of all of life and all of creation. So Moses even mentioned the Sabbath. We talk about the 50th year as the year of Jubilee. This would permit the land to enjoy its Sabbaths and be renewed. So let me tell you how smart Israel is today. Most of the major landholders, Jewish landholders in Israel, are Orthodox, long-standing families who have been in Israel for a long time, back from the early 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, and the first wave of settlers where you could have title to land. Now you can no longer have title to land. You can lease the land. All right? And they are required by law in the 50th year to give the land a rest. Okay? You know that during the winter months that plants begin to go dormant above the ground, but they build up carbohydrates in their root system to be released as sugar to nurture it while it's in its growth spurt. So it's building up food store. All right? The land, when you leave it idle for a year, allows the nutrients to soak in, allows the rain, allows more, there's releasing of more chemicals, it becomes more oxygen rich, but there's a prohibition against working it. So here's what happens today in Israel in what's declared the 50th year. I, as a landowner, lease you, a non-Jewish person, a 1-year lease. And I say, you know what? I'm not touching the land for a year. I'm in accordance with the law. See, take a look. I haven't put my hand to the land. These guys, you're working the land. I'm not doing it. I'm going to be obedience and compliance because I've given at the 50-year rest. But I can't afford, because I got bills to pay, to have no harvest. So I work out a deal with you, and they hire somebody to work the land for them in the 50th year. The land is not getting a rest. Then we come to Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. Very important word, eletodot, T-O-L-D-O-T. Maybe one of the most important words you'll ever learn in Hebrew. It means generations. Eletodot hashamayim v'charetz behibaram bayom asot Adonai Elohim eretz v'shamayim. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. So we're going to spend the next couple minutes talking about the generations. When were the generations created? Let me give you a few clues. I knew you before you were in your mother's womb. When were the generations created? Before the world was created. God created the generations. And what generations do we study? How many of you have done studies on the Moabites? How many think that that's a real big topic for studying the Moabites? Lot lays drunk, naked, has 2 daughters. They have incestuous relationships with them because there's no men to marry. And the nation of Moab is born. That's a pretty juicy Bible study. Let's rock on that one. No, we don't do that. However, Ruth came out of that incestuous relationship. We do lots of Bible studies about Ruth, don't we? She was something else. She was the daughter of incest. And then we love her husband. Oh my goodness, every young woman is raised to go seek out her Boaz. Well, who was Boaz's mama? Rahab the prostitute. So you might as well go downtown or go by the truck stop if you're looking for a great mama for your next son-in-law. If you're looking at the generations, that might be a good place to go find somebody that would meet a Rahab before she committed her life to the Lord and put her life on the line to provide housing for the spies. You mean we all have a past? So Rahab the harlot has a son named Boaz, and we think he's just rocking the world. Lot has 2 daughters who give birth to her children. Out of that lineage comes Ruth, and we think she's just precious with her devotion to Naomi. And so Ruth and Boaz get married, and they have a son named Obed. And Obed has a son named Jesse, and Jesse has a son named David. And David's a philanderer, and he's a murderer, and his hands are stained with blood. He's got a temper, but he honors the king, and the king happens to be his, what was his relationship with Saul? There was some kind of father-in-law. He was married to Saul's daughter. You think you got dysfunction? You got nothing on these people. You got nothing. All right? You talk about going to family reunions to meet women, okay? That's in the Bible. But when you look at the generations, they're ragged, tagged, they're average people of really very comely backgrounds and very lowly people who are sinners, who are people that are not the example. Do you want to raise your son to be just like Lot? How many of you have named your child Lot? How many of you have a son or grandchild named Lot? Okay. Where do you think it ranks on the most popular names of young men in 2017? Okay. Probably not very high, if at all. But yet, considered righteous. Lot's one of the ones, when I stand before the Lord and I read the book of Hebrews and I read all about who the righteous ones was, and he calls Lot righteous, and I'm saying, come on, let us reason together here, boss. Okay, like the Bible says, let us reason together. Yeah, okay, you're going to have to show me this one. But he picked these generations. Why? Because he used the ordinary people who had a past to do extraordinary things. And when you read the words in the book of Revelation that we are overcomers by the word of our testimony and the blood of our Lamb, and the blood of the Lamb, understand that your testimony probably looks and sounds just like the testimony. And if you haven't found somebody in the Bible you can relate to, you need to read the Bible more. Because there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that in all of us. And we all come from a dysfunctional, I just did a special on dysfunctional families called Mending Broken Branches. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. You're never too old to have a happy childhood. You're never too old to go back and appreciate that God chose that man or that woman to be your mother and father. Not because of what they could give you, but because of what you would become because they didn't give it to you. See, I saw a father who had a work ethic. I have a work ethic. Last Sunday, a week ago Sunday, was the first time I've ever called in a couple of days before and said, listen, I'm not sick, I'm just tired. And if you wouldn't mind getting a substitute for me, I'm going to ask for the first day off I've ever asked for in ministry. And I took the day off. And I did not get out of bed. A week ago Sunday, I did not get out of bed. I don't have a television set in my bedroom. I have a Bible. It's the only other article, a lamp, a Bible, and a dog. In a bed, of course. And I stayed in there. And all I did was read through the Bible. And the next morning, I woke up refreshed, went back to work, tired, was gone. And I played 3 sets of tennis that week. And now I'm thankful I'm going out of town, so I don't have to play 3 sets of tennis this week because I can't handle it. All right. You are part of a generation, and you have a history. And your history, when you look at the line of Messiah, and it's one of the only times in the Bible both the husband and the wife's lineage is given, the generations are given. Ask yourself, why was so-and-so left out? Why did it go from Adam to Seth? Wasn't there Cain and Abel? But they're not mentioned in the genealogy, are they? No, because they weren't aligned to Messiah. And when you begin to get the fact that the Toldot, the generations were given to us so we could see God's plan to bring the Messiah in, to bring him to safety, to take him out of harm's way, to bring him to earth and then take him to heaven and then to bring him back, and all the things in the generations that were and will be are all by divine design. It was all laid out. The master plan was laid out. He tells us the end, Genesis 3:15, the end, says the seed of the woman will crush the head of the seed of the serpent. That is the end from the beginning. And now we've just got to figure it out. And that's why understanding the generations is so important. When we go to Israel and we stand in the place of the generations, the patriarchs and the matriarchs and the people of the Bible, we begin to realize that the lineage is what determines who you are. And you are only known by whose son you were. There were no middle names and last names. So it mattered who your father was. And it was because of this lineage that we look at it, we realize that it doesn't matter that I had a relative that was this or a relative that was that, because Solomon's dad, Solomon's mother, Solomon himself, Jacob walking in and saying, "Hi, honey, 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 I'm home." All right. We're talking about dysfunction. It's all in the Bible, but you got to understand the generations. Amen? All right, I kept you a little long. Thank you, Jason, for coming all the way down to do this. Let's give Jason a big round of applause. He does all this. He does all this for free and pays me just for the privilege of working for them. Can you imagine that? Because I can't, and neither can he.